They were hailed as the technocrats, unelected experts called in to rescue Greece and Italy as they teetered on the brink of financial collapse. But for Europe's most indebted countries, the plan hasn't worked out. The politics of the technocrats. This is Inside Story. Hello, I'm Darina Bougueda. Welcome to the program. Well, they have impressive CVs and impeccable economic credentials, but no popular mandate to govern. So-called technocrat prime ministers supposed to rise above the political bickering and drive through unpopular policies at a time of national need. But politics is never far away. So much so that Italian Prime Minister Mario Monti has announced he'll resign. Monti says he can no longer govern after the party of his predecessor, Silvio Berlusconi, withdrew its support. Well, the decision throws Italy into yet more political turmoil, and the country's already mired in recession, has a huge public debt, and is about to vote on a crucial budget. On top of all this, Berlusconi, who resigned in disgrace just last year, has indicated he'll run for a fourth term in office. And the man charged with tackling Greece's financial crisis was Lucas Papademos. He succeeded big-name politician George Papandreou, a third-generation prime minister. Unlike Monti in Italy, he imposed strict austerity measures as head of an emergency government. But Greeks didn't like austerity any more than the Italians did. And after less than 6 months in office, Papademos bowed to political and public pressure and resigned. An inevitable conclusion in the eyes of opponents who criticized the appointment of such unelected experts as undemocratic and just a short-term fix. So to discuss the politics of appointing unelected technocrats, I'm joined by my three guests. We have in London Vincenzo Scarpetta. He's a researcher at Open Europe. And joining us from Rome is Ettore Greco. He's the director of the Institute of International Affairs. And over in Aberdeen, Andrea Teti, who's a lecturer in international relations at the University of Aberdeen. Good to have you with us all on this edition of Inside Story. Andrea, let me ask you first for your initial reading into the announcement that Mario Monti is going to resign and Berlusconi may be running for prime minister. Is Monti leaving Italy in a better place than it was a year ago when he took over the technocratic government?
Well, first of all, this is entirely predictable. In fact, quite a lot of us had expected Berlusconi to come back in some form or another. The only real question was whether he was going to try to act from behind the scenes or whether he was going to take a personal initiative. Now it seems that he is going to take a personal initiative. He's going to run in elections that are going to be scheduled for either February or early March.
Right. We will talk about Berlusconi. We will talk about Berlusconi a little later. But if you can just tell me if you think Italy is in a better position today when Mario Monti is going to resign than when he took it over a year ago.
Absolutely. That depends on your point of view. If you are in the financial elite of Italy or certainly in the macroeconomic financial elite of Europe, certainly the answer is yes. If you're looking at it from the point of view of ordinary Italians, the answer is no. But it's no because largely Monti has carried out the kinds of policies that Berlusconi was supposed to carry out but didn't. And this is precisely the source of worry that there is in the capitals of Europe today.
Ettore, what about your thoughts?
Yes, I think now Italy is in a better position financially. One can just look at the borrowing costs for Italy, which is much lower than at the time when Monti took office. But certainly the Monti government was not able to introduce measures capable of stimulating growth. Italy is now expected to record a negative growth of about 2.2% this year or so. So this is very negative for ordinary Italians, which are feeling a lot the brunt of the fiscal austerity. One can say, in a sense, Italy is trapped in the so-called austerity trap.
Vincenzo?
Yes, I broadly agree with what the first guest said. I think in terms of international credibility, Monti is certainly leaving Italy in a better place and in a better shape than it found it. But of course, on the other hand, the austerity that was needed to achieve the required fiscal consolidation is now starting to really bite on the average Italian. So it depends a bit on which perspective and what aspects are you really looking at.
Okay, well, let's just take a look at exactly how Mario Monti is leaving Italy. He's been in the job, as we're saying, for a little over a year, and here's how Italy's economy is looking right now. Nearly 11% of the workforce is unemployed. That is up from just under 9% when Mario Monti took over. And economic growth, or gross domestic product, contracted 2.4% in the third quarter of 2012, and that's compared with the same quarter last year, while the debt to GDP ratio is about the same at 120%. Andrea, these figures don't seem to point to a very positive Italy that Mario Monti is leaving.
Exactly. And if you look into any more detail in the figures, the situation is worse. So, for example, it's not simply a question of people, for example, being laid off, so workers, but also small businesses, small and medium enterprises, which have been for a long time the backbone of the Italian economy, are suffering really dire conditions in terms of borrowing requirements. For example, a lot of them are going bust. So no, if you look at some of the macroeconomic indicators, the situation is stable, if not slightly improving. But if you look in any kind of detail, the situation is a lot worse. And the problem that this poses is the one that we had at the beginning, which is where are the structural reforms going to come from? And there's no, whether it's Monti or Berlusconi, we really don't see where this is coming from at the moment.
Ettore, did Mario Monti, was he given enough of a chance to go through these structural reforms that Andrea is talking to us about? And some say that these technocratic governments are simply a quick fix. Did Italy need a quick fix at this point, or did it really need a long-term overhaul of the economic policies?
In fact, the Monti government started to introduce some structural measures. The point is that it met with strong resistance from the same parties supporting the government in parliament, and from trade unions and, for instance, professions which don't want the services market to be liberalized. So those reforms introduced by Monti were in fact half-hearted and were watered down by Parliament. And the second point one has to stress, in any case, structural reform can have an effect only in the longer term. So whereas population feels the impact of the austerity measures, the positive benefits of the structural reform can be felt only in 2 or 3 years.
Vincenzo, do you agree with that statement? And Mario Monti himself has said that he administered painful medicine which will bring Italy benefits in the long term.
Well, to be fair to Mario Monti, one could not expect him to sort out all of Italy's economic problems in more than 1 year. What my personal assessment is that he has given a steer in the right direction, but of course a lot still needs to be done. And as regards the indicators and the fact that unemployment has gone up, well, of course that was always going to happen in the short term, because these are the bad effects of austerity. And I agree that Mario Monti has done something important already in terms of structural reforms, but the effects of these reforms will only be perceived in the longer term.
Well, you say that more needs to be done. What exactly are you referring to at this point?
Well, for example, more needs to be done to open up the labor market, because something has been done for the private sector, nothing has been done for the public sector. Also, business environment needs to be improved in Italy, because several studies have shown that, for example, Italian businesses are those who pay the highest taxes in Europe. So all of this needs to be changed if Italy is to return to growth.
Speaking of Europe, I'll just get to that in a moment. But Mario Monti, let's just look at his credentials for a moment, because he's a respected economist and he's well connected to the upper ranks of the European Union machine, in fact. And as a European commissioner, he crossed swords with the likes of Microsoft as well as General Electric. And there he also earned the nickname Super Mario from colleagues as well as the media. Now, Monti served as rector and president of Bocconi University in Milan. He was named as senator for life by Italian President Giorgio Napolitano, just days, in fact, before he was asked to form a government. And today I saw you nodding when Vincenzo was speaking there. Now, Mario Monti certainly has the right credentials for the job, but does he, as some people say, represent more of Europe's interests as a whole rather than Italy, being so close to the European Commission?
Well, I mean, not just Europe's interest. I mean, if you look at the background of most of the members of the Monti government, they're also extremely close to business. Now, from a certain point of view, that can be a good thing, because as one of your previous speakers was saying, Italian businesses do face in the European context, they face an unusually difficult scenario, even from the point of view of taxation, but not only that, in terms of regulation and so on. But let's be clear about this. The burden of taxation, if we want to talk about burdens of taxation, the levels of taxation are highest, they hit highest in Italy on employees. And so when we talk about reforming the labour market, we need to be very careful. On the one hand, there are certain measures that are going to be useful, but if we're talking about simply liberalising the labour market, it's not at all clear that this is going to have positive macroeconomic benefits in the long run. If you look, for example, there's a study that was carried out a couple of years ago by OSCE, which correlated the competitiveness of economies with the level of labour market regulation. And the ones that scored the highest, that were the most competitive, were also the ones that had the highest levels of labour market regulation, like, for example, Scandinavian countries or Germany. So it's not at all clear that we have this equation that we take for granted most of the time between liberalisation of the labour market and economic, sustainable and equitable economic growth, which is what we're really after here when we talk about structural economic reforms. So on the one hand, the Monti government does have very strong credentials, but it's a certain kind of credentials that we're talking about. They have a certain kind of perspective on how to achieve macroeconomic growth. And this is precisely the point of contestation in Italian politics today.
Let's just move away from Italy for one moment, and then we will come back to it. But look at Greece, because Lucas Papademos took office as Greece's new prime minister in November 2011. He had no previous political experience, but he was seen as well placed to handle the debt crisis, and he joined the Central Bank of Greece as a chief economist in 1985, moving up the ranks to become governor in 1994. He also served as vice president of the European Central Bank from 2002 to 2010 and helped to oversee Greece's efforts to join the Eurozone. In April, Papademos handed his resignation to the Greek president after a short-lived rescue mission to save the country from bankruptcy. Ettore, if I can come over to you in Rome, when you look at men such as Mario Monti as well as Lucas Papademos, can they be passed off as neutral technicians?
No, I don't think so. Monti is far from being a purely technical figure. One should not forget that Monti was for 10 years commissioner at the European Union, in the European Union, so he exercised a very important executive power. So it's a mistake, in my view, to consider Mario Monti as a purely technical figure. I would add that in any case, he had a very short time horizon, just 1 year or so. So from the very beginning, everybody knew that he had no time to reform substantially Italy's economic system. He had necessarily to concentrate rather on fiscal discipline. And second point, which is very important, his government had to rely in parliament on a very diverse and fragmented coalition. This was another disadvantage for him. He had to navigate through very troubled waters in parliament.
Well, what about the Italian people, Ettore? Will they be happy to go back to the ballot boxes next year and see the end of this technocratic government in Italy?
It seems, according to practically every opinion polls, that the center-left coalition will win the next election. Since it's now more certain that the Italians will vote with the current electoral law, the center-left will probably end up getting a substantial majority of seats, absolute majority in the lower house of parliament, 55% of seats, and probably also in the Senate. The problem is that this center-left coalition is not particularly cohesive, and its leader, Pierluigi Bersani, who is also the head of the largest party of the coalition, the Democratic Party, will rely on the support of far-left groups which want to change and also abrogate some measures introduced by the Monti government, which may be a source of concern for Italy's partners in the financial markets.
Vincenzo, what have technocrats, in your opinion, been able to achieve, whether it's over the past year in Italy or whether it's during the 6 months that Papademos was prime minister in Greece, that the elected politicians were not able to?
Well, I think when we talk about Papademos, then the task for him was even more difficult because, as you said, he was only in charge for 6 months. In terms of reforms, one cannot deny that Monti, let's go back to Italy, Monti in Italy has achieved some important objectives and has done something important to, as I said before, to open up Italy's labor market, certain closed professions, and he had already also embarked on a series of reforms to boost the competitiveness of the Italian economy and to make Italy return to growth. The importance of having Monti in government at that point in time was that Monti was the only figure in Italian politics which was able to gather sufficient support in the Italian parliament, with, of course, the setback that he is an unelected technocrat and is the unelected head of an unelected government. So just picking up from the point that has been made by the previous guest, support for Monti is also plummeting. So if we look at opinion polls, as soon as Monti's reforms have really started to bite, support for him has really plummeted, and now only around 1/3 of Italians would be happy with a second mandate for Monti.
Okay, then having said that, Vincenzo, does a technocratic government and the waning support, as you say, for Monti, does it make it easier for Berlusconi to come back into the political picture?
Berlusconi's comeback is very, very interesting at this point in time because he's trailing in pretty much all the opinion polls. His party is well behind the center-left coalition. And this is particularly interesting for Italy's role and Italy's position in Europe, because Berlusconi has been tough in his rhetoric against austerity implemented by the Monti government, and austerity imposed by Germany. So he has been talking a lot about German hegemony in Europe and Angela Merkel imposing effectively her will on the rest of the Eurozone. So now that Berlusconi is back in the arena and he wants to try to win the competition, as he said, I'm entering the race to win it. So he will probably push ahead with a very populist electoral campaign, talking about austerity, attacking German-imposed austerity. So this is very interesting for Italy's future in the Eurozone. And if I can add only one thing, this is.
All right. Well, let me just dig in a little deeper into Berlusconi. And Silvio Berlusconi, as we all know, he's had a colorful political career. In 1993, he founded his own political party, Forza Italia, or Go Italy. And within a year, he was elected prime minister. He returned to power in May 2001 and went on to lead Italy's longest-serving government since the Second World War. Berlusconi was dogged by allegations of corruption, bribery, as well as fraud. But he returned to power for a third time in January 2008 at the helm of a revamped party, People of Freedom. Berlusconi survived dozens of no-confidence votes over the next 3 years. But in November 2011, he resigned after losing his parliamentary majority. And he was later convicted of tax fraud and is facing sexual misconduct allegations. But now, as we're saying, he could be making a comeback. Listen.
Even when I was doing sports, working, studying, I've never entered a race to get a good ranking, but I've always entered a race to win. In everyone's opinion, we needed a credited leader, but we couldn't find this leader. Alas, a man like Berlusconi in 1994. It's not that we didn't look for him, we certainly looked for him, but there is no one.
Andrea, what do you make of the Berlusconi comeback? Because some people blame Berlusconi himself for the economic crisis in Italy. This was a man that had to leave through the side door of the presidential palace the night he resigned because people were so upset at the economic situation in Italy. What do you make of that?
Well, Italians don't have that short a memory, so I think quite a lot of people will know exactly what kind of position he and his coalition put Italy into, not without the support from the centre-left, that's for sure. But it's interesting, the space that Berlusconi is hoping to move into, politically speaking, is precisely the space that's been created by the form, the shape of the Monti reforms. One of the things that Monti hasn't done is he hasn't tackled tax evasion, which is massive in Italy. He hasn't tackled corruption, and he hasn't tackled organised crime, all of which are not just serious problems, they're serious economic problems. You put those together, the value of those, and even of the most conservative estimates, you're talking about a couple of €100 billion. So this is a substantial amount of money, and people know that one of the reasons why they're having economic difficulties, this is what they perceive, is that nobody is tackling this problem.
And
so on the one hand, Berlusconi doesn't have any credibility on that sense, but on the other hand, what's the alternative? Who is it who is going to intervene in that space? And that's the space that he's trying to capitalize on.
Well, that is precisely the question, Ettore. Is this something that Berlusconi, in your opinion, is going to be able to try and capitalize on and succeed?
So he has signaled very clearly that he will campaign on a very anti-EU, anti-German platform, and also denouncing the impact of the austerity measures, the inability of the Monti government to relaunch the growth, etc. I would expect him to regain some ground because he's very capable of convincing a portion of the electorate, and there is no alternative at the moment for people who are on the right side of the spectrum. But I would not expect him to gain enough ground to fill the huge gap his party is recording compared with the Democratic Party and the center-left coalition, simply because he has lost much of his credibility. I think now Italians are much more aware than in the past that the promises that he made in the past could not be now kept in this situation. So he will have difficulty in campaigning on a platform of promises as he did in the past.
Vincenzo, how much ground do you think, if any, Berlusconi will be able to make?
Well, Berlusconi certainly remains a very, very good communicator, and I think his personal figure, his personal participation in the electoral campaign will add value to the performance of his party in terms of electoral support. Having said that, though, the gap seems to be at the moment very, very large between the centre-left coalition, especially the Democratic Party and his party. So I agree that his presence, his participation in the electoral campaign will bring some votes back to his party, but I don't think it will be enough in the end.
And just final thoughts, Vincenzo, excuse me, was this always Berlusconi's plan? Do you think that politicians were only giving Mario Monti enough time to enact these painful austerity measures that Italy had to go through and have Monti bear the brunt of austerity?
That's an interesting question. The point is that Italy has committed to doing certain things with its Eurozone partners. So, as I was saying before, as Barroso said to an important Italian newspaper today, irrespective of the government, the path initiated by Monti should not be abandoned. So, the next government will probably have to face the same problems and will probably have to continue, will certainly have to continue, I would say, with fiscal consolidation.
Thanks very much to our guests in London, Vincenzo Scarpetta, in Rome, Ettore Greco, and in Aberdeen, Andrea Teti. Thanks very much for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. And to our viewers, we will always welcome your feedback. You can email your thoughts to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. Thanks very much for watching, and for me and the whole team, goodbye for now.